They say family should be your safe haven, the place where you're loved unconditionally for who you are, not judged for what you do. But sometimes the people we sacrifice everything for become the very ones who tear us down piece by piece. My name is Margaret Bellweather, and for 31 years I believed that my dedication to saving lives and caring for my family would earn me respect and gratitude in my golden years. I couldn't have been more wrong. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The moment I realized just how little my daughter-in-law thought of me wasn't when she forgot to invite me to her birthday celebration last spring. It wasn't when she conveniently scheduled family photos while I was working my weekend shift at Riverside Medical Center. It wasn't even when she told my grandson Tommy that Grandma was too busy with sick people to attend his school play. No, the devastating moment of clarity came on a humid August evening when I arrived at their magnificent home in Crescent Hills, exhausted after pulling a double shift in the emergency room. I had rushed straight from the hospital because my son Marcus had called, practically begging me to help with an urgent babysitting situation. Their regular nanny had canceled last minute, and they had tickets to some exclusive charity gala that apparently couldn't be missed. I stood at their imposing front door, still wearing my hospital scrubs, my hair pulled back in the same neat bun I'd worn for decades, my hands freshly sanitized but carrying the faint scent of antiseptic that comes with 12 hours of emergency medicine. When Victoria Sterling Bellweather opened the door, her face immediately twisted into an expression of pure disgust. "Oh my God, Margaret," she said, taking an exaggerated step backward as if I were carrying some contagious disease. "You absolutely reek of medicine and hospital things. It's honestly nauseating. You can't possibly come into my house smelling like that. What will the neighbors think if they see you?" She stood there in her silk designer dress, dripping in jewelry that cost more than most people's cars, looking at me like I was something she'd found stuck to the bottom of her Louboutin heels. This was the same woman whose medical bills I had quietly helped pay when she had complications during Tommy's birth. The same woman whose mortgage I had co-signed when Marcus's startup was struggling. The same woman who lived in luxury, partly because of my decades of careful financial planning and generous support. But what Victoria didn't know that evening, what she couldn't have possibly imagined as she stood there treating me like a common servant who had dared to dirty her pristine doorstep, was that I held the keys to her entire comfortable existence, and I was about to give her a dose of medicine she would never forget. You see, I wasn't just any hospital worker. I was Dr. Margaret Bellweather, Chief of Emergency Medicine at Riverside Medical Center, with 31 years of saving lives under my belt. I held 2 medical degrees, had published research papers that revolutionized trauma care, and commanded the respect of every medical professional in 3 counties. During my career, I had performed life-saving procedures on governors, celebrities, and even Victoria's own father when he suffered his massive heart attack 2 years ago. More importantly, I had spent the better part of a decade quietly orchestrating the financial foundation that supported Marcus and Victoria's lavish lifestyle. The sprawling house in Crescent Hills? I had provided the down payment from my retirement fund, Victoria's precious BMW that she used for her daily trips to the country club. I was the primary guarantor on that loan, the private school tuition, for Tommy that allowed Victoria to brag about his exclusive education. Those payments came directly from my account every month. Marcus had convinced me it was temporary, just until his business took off. "You know how much this means to Victoria," he had said. "She comes from such a prominent family. We can't let her down." And like a fool, I had believed that my sacrifices would be appreciated, that my support would earn me a place of honor in their lives. Instead, I had become their dirty little secret, the working-class woman who smelled of antiseptic and dedication, who apparently wasn't sophisticated enough to be seen in their social circles. That night, as I stood in their marble entryway listening to Victoria complain to her friends about the help, and how difficult it was to maintain standards when dealing with certain types of people, I felt something inside me crystallize into diamond-hard resolve. Victoria Sterling Bellweather wanted to know what medicine smelled like. She was about to get a full prescription of exactly the kind of medicine I specialized in. The kind that cures people of their delusions about who really holds the power in their lives. What she didn't realize was that every luxury she enjoyed, every social status she flaunted, every opportunity she had to look down on others, it all existed because I had made it possible. And just like any skilled physician knows, sometimes the most effective treatment requires cutting out the infected tissue entirely. Over the next 2 hours, as I watched her parade around her guests, making subtle jokes about hospital odors and difficult family obligations, I began developing a treatment plan that would cure her of her arrogance once and for all. By the time that evening ended, Victoria would learn that the woman she thought was beneath her notice actually controlled every aspect of her comfortable life. She would discover that some medicine tastes bitter going down, but the lessons it teaches last forever. What happened next didn't just shock Victoria and Marcus. It sent ripples through their entire social circle and changed the lives of everyone. Who had underestimated the power of a woman who had spent her life healing others? But sometimes, the most important healing you can do is teaching someone the hard truth about respect, gratitude, and the consequences of biting the hand that feeds. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The humiliation didn't end at the front door. Oh no. Victoria was just getting started with her performance that evening. After making me stand outside, like some kind of delivery person while she fetched air freshener to neutralize the hospital smell, she finally allowed me into my own son's home, the home I had helped purchase. "I suppose you can use the service entrance next time," Victoria said, her voice carrying that particular tone wealthy people use when they're pretending to be helpful while actually being cruel. "It opens directly into the mudroom where we keep the cleaning supplies. Much more appropriate for your situation, my situation," as if being a doctor who saved lives was somehow shameful. I followed her through the gleaming hallways of the house, past the Italian marble I had helped pay for, under the crystal chandelier I had surprised them with for their anniversary. Victoria kept a theatrical distance between us, occasionally waving her hand in front of her nose as if my presence was physically assaulting her delicate sensibilities. "Marcus is upstairs getting ready," she informed me without looking back. "Tommy is in the playroom, though I've already told him to stay downstairs tonight. I don't want him getting too comfortable with hospital smells. Children are so impressionable. You know, we reached the kitchen, my kitchen, if we're being honest about who paid for those custom cabinets and granite countertops." Victoria perched herself on one of the bar stools like a queen holding court, finally turning to face me directly. "Now about tonight," she began, pulling out her phone to check her reflection in the camera. "The Ashworths are coming by around 9 to pick up some documents Marcus forgot at the office. They're very important clients, and honestly, Margaret, I can't have them thinking we associate with—" She paused, clearly searching for the most cutting words possible. "People who smell like antiseptic and sickness." "People like me, you mean?" I said quietly, setting my purse down on the counter I had helped buy. Victoria's perfectly contoured face broke into what she probably thought was a sympathetic smile. "It's not personal, Margaret. It's just that some people move in different circles, you know. The Ashworths are from old money, real society families. They wouldn't understand why we have medical personnel in our home during social visits. Medical personnel, not family. Not the woman who had rushed from saving someone's life to help with their childcare emergency. Just medical personnel who apparently contaminated whatever space I occupied." "I see," I replied, though I was beginning to see far more than Victoria realized. She leaned forward conspiratorially, as if she was about to share some valuable wisdom. "Look, I know you think I'm being dramatic, but image is everything in our world. When Marcus and I attend charity galas or country club events, people notice details. They notice who you associate with, how your family presents itself. I simply can't afford to have people wondering why my mother-in-law smells like a hospital ward. The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. Here was a woman whose very existence depended on my financial support, whose comfortable lifestyle was built on my decades of sacrifice, telling me that my life-saving work made me too embarrassing to acknowledge as family. And another thing, Victoria continued, now fully warming to her theme, I think it might be best if you start calling before these visits. I know Marcus asked you to come tonight, but in the future, I'd appreciate some advance notice so I can plan accordingly. Maybe suggest you shower and change at your own place first? I've been looking into some lovely perfumes that might help mask the occupational odors. She said, occupational odors, like I was a garbage collector rather than someone who had spent 3 decades saving lives. But then came the moment that changed everything. The moment that would haunt Victoria for months to come. 8-year-old Tommy came bounding into the kitchen, his face lighting up when he saw me. "Grandma Maggie!" he shouted, running toward me with arms outstretched. "Tommy, no!" Victoria shrieked, jumping off her stool with such force she nearly knocked it over. "Don't hug Grandma right now. She smells like medicine and sick people. You don't want to catch anything, do you?" My grandson stopped mid-run, confusion clouding his innocent face. "But Grandma helps sick people get better," he said uncertainly. "That's good, right?" Victoria's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "Oh, sweetheart, that's very nice of Grandma, but some jobs are just unpleasant. They leave smells and germs that we don't want in our beautiful home. Maybe when Grandma learns to clean herself up properly, she can give you proper hugs again." The room went completely silent except for the soft hum of the refrigerator I had helped purchase. Tommy looked between his mother and me, his 8-year-old mind trying to process why the grandmother who brought him books and helped with his homework was suddenly being treated like a dangerous stranger. And in that moment, watching my grandson learn that the work I was most proud of, the calling that had defined my entire adult life, was something shameful that made me unfit for his embrace. Something fundamental shifted inside me. That was the moment I decided Victoria Sterling Bellweather needed to learn exactly what kind of medicine I was capable of prescribing. And, unlike the healing remedies I dispensed at the hospital, this particular treatment was going to have some very unpleasant side effects. What Victoria didn't know was that her little performance was about to cost her everything. Because the woman she thought smelled too much like medicine was about to show her exactly what life looked like without the financial foundation that made her superior attitude possible. The prescription I was about to write would cure her of her arrogance permanently. And unlike most medicine, this dose was going to taste exactly as bitter as she deserved. I wasn't always Dr. Margaret Bellweather, Chief of Emergency Medicine. There was a time when I was just Maggie O'Connor, a girl from the wrong side of Millbrook, whose father worked double shifts at the steel mill and whose mother took in laundry to make ends meet. My journey to that gleaming hospital where Victoria found my scent so offensive began in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment, where the smell of industrial soap and my father's work clothes was a constant reminder of our place in the world's hierarchy. Growing up, I learned early that respect wasn't given based on your family name or bank account. It was earned through hard work, dedication, and treating people with dignity regardless of their circumstances. My parents, Irish immigrants who had arrived in America with nothing but dreams and determination, instilled in me the belief that honest work was never something to be ashamed of, no matter how your hands smelled at the end of the day. My father, Sean O'Connor, would come home from the mill covered in sweat and metal shavings, his hands permanently stained with grease that no amount of scrubbing could completely remove. But when he walked through our front door, my mother Catherine would greet him with the same warmth and respect she'd show a king. "There's my hard-working man," she'd say, kissing his cheek without the slightest concern for the industrial odors that clung to his clothes. "Never be ashamed of honest work, Maggie girl," my father would tell me as he washed up for dinner each night. "The smell of labor is the sweetest perfume in the world because it means you're contributing something meaningful to this life." Those words would echo in my mind decades later as Victoria wrinkled her nose at the antiseptic scent that marked my own honest labor. I was 8 years old when I first knew I wanted to be a doctor. My younger brother Patrick had fallen from a tree in our neighborhood, breaking his arm so badly the bone was visible through the skin. While other children ran away screaming, I stayed by his side, using my school sweater to stop the bleeding and talking to him in calm, steady tones to keep him from going into shock. When the ambulance arrived, the paramedic, a kind woman, named Sarah Chen, looked at my makeshift bandaging and said something that changed my life forever. "You've got healing hands, young lady. Have you ever thought about becoming a doctor?" At 8 years old, the idea seemed impossible. Doctors came from wealthy families, went to expensive schools, lived in big houses in neighborhoods like Crescent Hills. They didn't emerge from cramped apartments where the furniture was secondhand, and dinner sometimes consisted of whatever vegetables my mother could grow in coffee cans on our fire escape. But my parents, God bless them, never let me believe that my dreams were too big for my circumstances. "If that's what you want, Maggie," my mother said that night as she tucked me into the bed I shared with my sister, "then we'll find a way to make it happen. Dreams don't care about your address or your bank account. They only care about how badly you want them. And I wanted it with every fiber of my being." Throughout high school, I worked 3 part-time jobs: cleaning offices after school, stocking, shelves at the local grocery store on weekends, and tutoring younger students in math and science. Every penny I earned went into my medical school fund, a battered mason jar that sat on my dresser like a beacon of hope. My classmates were planning proms and parties while I was studying anatomy textbooks I'd borrowed from the library until the pages were worn thin. When they complained about the smell of formaldehyde from biology class, I breathed it in like perfume, knowing it was the scent of my future. The guidance counselor at Millbrook High, Mrs. Peterson, tried to gently steer me toward more realistic goals. "Nursing is a wonderful profession for girls from your background," she said during our senior year meeting. "Much more achievable than medical school, and you'd still be helping people." But I didn't want to be realistic. I wanted to be exceptional. When I graduated as valedictorian, earning a full scholarship to State University, my parents threw a party in our tiny apartment. The entire neighborhood came: steel workers and shop clerks, housekeepers and mechanics, all celebrating the little girl from the projects who was going to become a doctor. My father stood up that night, his weathered hands holding a beer can like it was fine champagne, and said words that I would carry with me through every challenge that followed. "Tonight, we celebrate our Maggie, who never forgot that it doesn't matter what you smell like. At the end of the day, if you've spent that day making the world a little better." College was a brutal awakening to the class differences that would follow me throughout my career. While my roommate, a senator's daughter named Elizabeth Hartwell, complained about the gross smells from the cadaver lab, I was grateful for every moment I got to spend learning about the human body. When she wrinkled her nose at the antiseptic odor that clung to my clothes after anatomy class, I simply reminded myself that this was the smell of my dreams coming true. Medical school was even harder. Not just academically, though the workload was crushing, but socially. I was surrounded by students whose parents were doctors, lawyers, politicians. They spoke casually about family vacations to Europe while I worked night shifts at a diner to pay for textbooks. They complained about the unpleasant odors of hospital rotations while I saw each clinical experience as a sacred privilege. During my residency at Metropolitan General, I met James Bellweather, a fellow resident, whose family owned a small chain of pharmacies. James was different from the other wealthy students I'd encountered. He never made me feel ashamed of my background or my family's working-class roots. When we were both exhausted after 36-hour shifts, smelling like antiseptic and stress, sweat, he would joke that we were wearing eau de dedication, the finest fragrance in the world. "You know what I love about you, Maggie," he said one night as we shared vending machine coffee in an empty hospital corridor. "You never apologize for being exactly who you are. You own your story, your struggles, your victories. That's going to make you an incredible doctor." We married during our final year of residency, in a simple ceremony at my parents' church. My father walked me down the aisle in his one good suit, the same one he'd worn to my high school graduation, and I had never felt more proud of where I came from. James and I built our practice together, specializing in emergency medicine because we both believed in being there for people during their worst moments. We worked side by side for 15 years until a car accident took him from me when Marcus was just 12 years old. After James died, I threw myself even deeper into my work. The emergency room became my sanctuary, the place where the smell of antiseptic and the sounds of life-saving equipment drowned out the silence of my empty house. I worked longer hours, took on more responsibilities, earned more certifications and accolades. By the time Marcus graduated from college, I had become the youngest chief of emergency medicine in the history of Riverside Medical Center. I had published research that revolutionized trauma care protocols. I had trained hundreds of medical students and residents. I had saved thousands of lives. And through it all, I never forgot my father's words about the sweet perfume of honest work. But somehow, in raising Marcus, I had failed to pass on those values. Somewhere along the way, my son had learned to see my dedication to healing as something ordinary, something to be taken for granted rather than celebrated. And when he married Victoria, he had chosen someone who viewed my life's work as a source of embarrassment rather than pride. Standing in that kitchen, watching my grandson learn to be ashamed of the grandmother who had dedicated her life to healing others, I realized that I had been so focused on providing financial support that I had forgotten to demand the one thing that should never have been negotiable: basic respect for the woman who had literally built her life around saving others. The pattern of disrespect didn't begin overnight. Like most toxic dynamics, it started small, with tiny cuts that seemed insignificant at the time but slowly bled away my dignity, until I barely recognized the confident woman I had once been. It all began during Marcus and Victoria's engagement party 3 years earlier. I had just finished a particularly grueling week at the hospital. A multi-car accident had brought in 7 critical patients, and I had spent 4 straight days essentially living in the trauma bay, coordinating care and making split-second decisions that meant the difference between life and death for entire families. When I arrived at the Sterling family estate in Harborview Heights for the engagement celebration, I was exhausted but proud. We had saved all 7 patients, including a 6-year-old girl who had been airlifted in with massive internal bleeding. The local news had even run a story about our trauma team's exceptional work that week. I had rushed home to change into my best dress, a simple but elegant navy blue number that James had always said brought out my eyes. I had even stopped at the florist to pick up a bouquet of white roses for Victoria, wanting to make a good impression on the woman my son had chosen to love. The Sterling mansion was everything I had expected from Victoria's descriptions. Imposing. Wrought iron gates, a circular driveway that could accommodate a dozen luxury cars, marble statues positioned throughout manicured gardens that probably cost more to maintain than most people's annual salaries. I felt a flutter of nervousness as I walked up the grand staircase to the front entrance, suddenly conscious of my simple dress and practical shoes. Victoria's mother, Constance Sterling, answered the door herself. An unusual occurrence, I would later learn, as the family typically employed staff for such tasks. She was an imposing woman in her 60s, with silver hair styled in a perfect chignon and wearing a string of pearls that looked like they belonged in a museum. "You must be Margaret," she said, her tone cordial but cool as she looked me up and Down with the practiced eye of someone accustomed to evaluating people based on their appearance and accessories. Please, come in. Victoria has told us so much about you. The way she emphasized so much made it clear that not all of what Victoria had shared was flattering. I stepped into the foyer, which was larger than my entire first apartment, and immediately felt underdressed despite my efforts. The other guests, Victoria's family friends, college sorority sisters, and Marcus's new social circle, were all dressed in outfits that probably cost more than I made in a month. The women wore designer gowns and jewelry that caught the light from the crystal chandelier, while the men sported tailored suits and watches that gleamed like small beacons of wealth. Mother, Victoria appeared at my elbow, stunning in a champagne-colored silk dress that fit her like it had been sewn directly onto her body. I see you've met Marcus's mother. Margaret works at the hospital, she added to her mother, as if this explained everything that might seem unusual about my presence. How dedicated of you, Constance replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Victoria mentioned you work very long hours. That must be quite demanding. The conversation was polite enough on the surface, but I could sense the undercurrent of judgment. Working long hours wasn't seen as admirable dedication. It was evidence of a certain class of person who had to work for a living rather than simply existing on inherited wealth and investments. Throughout the evening, I tried to engage with the other guests, sharing stories about my work when asked and listening politely to their discussions of charity board positions and vacation homes. But I began to notice a pattern in how Victoria introduced me to people. This is Margaret, Marcus's mother, she would say, never mentioning my title or position. She works at the local hospital. Never Dr. Bellweather or Chief of Emergency Medicine. Just someone who worked at the hospital, as if I was a custodian or a cafeteria worker, rather than someone who had spent decades earning advanced degrees and saving lives. At first, I told myself I was being overly sensitive. After all, not everyone needed to know my professional accomplishments at a social gathering. But as the evening progressed, I realized that Victoria's other friends were being introduced with their full credentials. This is Sarah, who just made partner at Morrison & Associates, or meet Jennifer, who runs her own interior design firm. Only I was relegated to simply working at the hospital. The real turning point came when one of Victoria's sorority sisters, a perfectly coiffed blonde named Penelope, asked me about my work. I began explaining my role in emergency medicine, describing the satisfaction of being able to provide critical care during people's most vulnerable moments. Oh my, Penelope interrupted with a delicate shudder. That must be so unpleasant. All those sick people and medical smells. I could never handle being around blood and suffering all day. Don't you find it depressing? Before I could respond, Victoria jumped in with a laugh that sounded forced. Margaret is very dedicated to that kind of work. Some people are just drawn to more clinical environments. It's admirable, really, how some people can handle those sorts of conditions. The way she said those sorts of conditions made it sound like I was working in a sewage treatment plant rather than one of the most advanced medical facilities in the region. I imagine the smell must just cling to you, Penelope continued, wrinkling her nose slightly. All that antiseptic and medical stuff. Do you find it hard to get the hospital odors out of your clothes? I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment, not because I was ashamed of my work, but because I suddenly understood that this was how Victoria saw me, as someone who carried unpleasant odors and dealt with distasteful realities that polite society preferred to ignore. Actually, I said, finding my voice, I find the smell of a clean hospital quite comforting. It represents healing, hope, and the dedication of people who have chosen to spend their lives helping others in their darkest moments. The silence that followed was brief but telling. Penelope smiled tightly and quickly excused herself to refresh her drink. Victoria's expression was unreadable, but I caught the slight tightening around her eyes that suggested my defense of my profession had somehow been inappropriate. Later that evening, as the party was winding down, I overheard Victoria talking to her mother in the kitchen while I was looking for my purse. "She's very earnest," Constance was saying, "and I suppose her work is important in its own way. But darling, you'll need to help her understand the social dynamics of your new life together. Some of Marcus's business associates might find her a bit intense about her hospital work." "I know, Mother," Victoria replied with a sigh. She doesn't quite understand that not everyone wants to hear detailed stories about medical procedures over cocktails. I'm working on helping her develop more appropriate conversation topics for social settings. Standing in that hallway, listening to them discuss me like I was a social project that needed refinement, I felt something shift inside me. For the first time, I began to understand that my son had chosen a woman who saw my life's work not as something to be proud of, but as something to be managed and minimized. That night marked the beginning of a pattern that would only grow worse over the following years. Victoria would consistently introduce me in ways that diminished my accomplishments, redirect conversations when I tried to share anything meaningful about my work, and gradually train everyone around her to see me as Marcus's embarrassing mother, who worked at the hospital rather than Dr. Margaret Bellweather, a woman who had spent her career saving lives and advancing medical knowledge. Each small slight built upon the last, creating a foundation of disrespect that would eventually lead to that devastating moment in her kitchen when she told my grandson that his grandmother's life-saving work made her too dirty for his embrace. But what Victoria never understood was that while she was busy trying to erase my professional identity, I was quietly building the financial foundation that made her superior attitude possible. And eventually, she would learn that the woman she found so embarrassing held more power over her comfortable life than she had ever imagined. The trajectory of my relationship with Victoria took a dramatic turn for the worse 18 months ago when Marcus lost his job at Pinnacle Financial Services. What should have been a temporary setback became the catalyst for transforming me from an occasionally overlooked family member into their personal ATM, one who apparently came with the unfortunate side effect of smelling like antiseptic. Marcus had worked as a senior investment advisor at Pinnacle for 8 years, building what he claimed was a solid client base and earning a respectable 6-figure salary. Victoria loved to mention his position at dinner parties, always emphasizing the senior part of his title and the prestigious downtown office with its view of Riverside Park. For her, Marcus's job wasn't just about income. It was a crucial part of the social identity she had carefully constructed. The layoffs came suddenly, part of what the company called strategic restructuring, but what everyone understood to be cost-cutting measures after a series of poor investment decisions by upper management. Marcus called me on a Tuesday morning in March, his voice tight with stress and barely controlled panic. "Mom, I need to talk to you about something," he said without preamble. "Can you come over tonight? It's important." I had just finished a particularly challenging overnight shift where we'd dealt with a massive industrial accident at the Riverside manufacturing plant. 3 workers had been brought in with severe burns and chemical exposure, and I had spent 14 hours coordinating their care and ensuring their families received regular updates. I was exhausted, my scrubs stained with the evidence of a night spent fighting to save lives, but the urgency in Marcus's voice cut through my fatigue. When I arrived at their house in Crescent Hills, I immediately sensed something was wrong. Victoria answered the door wearing yoga pants and an oversized sweater, unusual for a woman who typically dressed like she was perpetually attending a society luncheon. Her perfectly styled hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and her face was free of the makeup she typically applied with museum-quality precision. "Margaret," she said, her voice lacking its usual sharp edge, "thank you for coming so quickly. Marcus is in his study." I found my son sitting behind his massive mahogany desk, staring at a laptop screen with the hollow expression of someone who had received devastating news. The study itself was a monument to success. Floor-to-ceiling built-in bookshelves, a Persian rug that had cost more than most cars, and framed photographs of Marcus with various minor celebrities and business leaders he had met at networking events. They let me go, he said without looking up from the screen. After 8 years of building that practice of bringing in millions in client assets, they just eliminated my position. I moved to sit in one of the leather chairs facing his desk, my heart breaking at the defeat in his voice. I'm so sorry, sweetheart. That must have been a shock. It's worse than you think, Marcus continued, finally meeting my eyes. The severance package is practically nothing. They're claiming the layoffs were performance-related even though my numbers were solid, and with the way the job market is right now for financial advisors. He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I remembered from his childhood when he was overwhelmed by homework or social pressures. You'll find something else, I said gently. You're talented and experienced. It might take some time, but we don't have time, he interrupted, and something in his tone made my stomach clench with apprehension. Mom, we're in serious trouble. Financially. The mortgage on this place, Victoria's car payments, Tommy's private school tuition, the country club membership fees. It all adds up to more than we can handle without my income. I glanced around the opulent study, taking in the expensive furnishings and wondering how two intelligent adults had allowed themselves to become so financially overextended. Surely you have some savings, some emergency fund. Marcus's laugh was bitter. We've been living pretty close to the edge for the past couple of years. Victoria's used to a certain lifestyle, and I wanted to be able to provide that for her. Her parents, well, you know how they are about appearances and status. I couldn't let her feel like she had married beneath her standards. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here was my son, worried about maintaining his wife's social status, while that same wife had spent years treating me like a second-class citizen because of my working-class origins and medical profession. Victoria appeared in the doorway, having traded her casual clothes for a more put-together outfit that still managed to look effortlessly expensive. Margaret, I'm sure Marcus has explained our situation. We were hoping, well, we were wondering if you might be able to help us through this temporary rough patch. Help how? I asked, though I already suspected where this conversation was heading. The mortgage payment is due next week, Marcus said, pulling up what looked like a banking website on his laptop. We're looking at $4,800 a month just for the house payment, not including property taxes and insurance. And that's before we factor in Victoria's BMW lease, Tommy's school tuition, and basic living expenses. The numbers he was throwing around made my head spin. Their monthly housing costs alone were more than many families earned in total income. Have you considered downsizing? Finding a smaller place that might be more manageable on a single income? Victoria's response was immediate and sharp. Absolutely not. This house isn't just where we live. It's part of Marcus's professional image. When he starts interviewing for new positions, potential employers will notice where he lives, what kind of neighborhood he can afford. Moving to some middle-class subdivision would send entirely the wrong message about his career trajectory. Stared at her, amazed by the disconnect between their financial crisis and her concern about appearances. Victoria, if Marcus doesn't have a job, what does it matter what message his house sends? It matters because we're not giving up, Marcus said firmly. This is a temporary setback, not a permanent change in our circumstances. I've already reached out to several headhunters, and there are some promising opportunities in the pipeline. I just need to maintain my current image while I navigate this transition, which is where we were hoping you might be able to help, Victoria added, her tone taking on a wheedling quality that made my skin crawl. We know you've been very successful in your career, very financially responsible. And since you don't have the same kinds of expenses we do, no mortgage, no car payments, no social obligations, we thought perhaps you could help us maintain our lifestyle temporarily. The way she said social obligations made it clear that she considered my simpler lifestyle to be evidence of some failing on my part, rather than a conscious choice to live below my means. How much are we talking about? I asked carefully. Marcus, and Victoria exchanged a look that suggested they had rehearsed this conversation. "We were thinking maybe $8,000 a month," Marcus said quickly. "Just to cover the mortgage, car payments, and essential expenses. It would only be for a few months. Just until I land the right position. $8,000 a month, nearly $100,000 a year. More than many people earned in their entire annual salary, they were asking me to provide as temporary assistance. And of course," Victoria added with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "we would be incredibly grateful. We know it's a significant amount, but we also know how much family means to you. And Tommy would benefit so much from maintaining stability in his living situation and school environment during this difficult time." There it was. The emotional manipulation, using my grandson as leverage to secure my financial support. The same grandson whom Victoria would later deem too pure to embrace his grandmother because she smelled like the hospital where she earned the money they were now desperate to access. Looking back now, I can see that this was the moment when the power dynamic in our relationship fundamentally shifted. Where once I had been the slightly embarrassing mother-in-law who worked at the hospital, I suddenly became essential to maintaining the lifestyle that defined Victoria's very identity. And yet, rather than gaining respect for my ability to provide this support, I somehow became even more marginalized, a necessary but distasteful resource to be managed and hidden away. What I didn't understand then was that my willingness to help during their crisis would be interpreted not as generosity, but as obligation. That my financial capability would be seen not as something to be grateful for, but as something they were entitled to access. And that the very success that made me able to support them would somehow make me even more unsuitable for their social circle. The woman who smelled like medicine was about to become their lifeline. But instead of earning gratitude, I was about to discover just how much my son and his wife could despise the very person keeping their world from collapsing. What I didn't anticipate when I agreed to help Marcus and Victoria through their financial crisis was how quickly my support would attract the attention of the Sterling family social circle. Within weeks of beginning my monthly payments, I found myself drawn into a web of complex family dynamics and social expectations that made my simple desire to help my son infinitely more complicated. The first sign of trouble came during Tommy's 8th birthday party, held at the exclusive Willowbrook Country Club, where Victoria maintained a membership that cost more than most people's monthly rent. I had offered to help with the party planning, perhaps contribute some homemade decorations, or organize games for the children. Victoria's response was swift and decisive. "Oh, Margaret, that's so sweet of you to offer," she said with that saccharine tone she used when she was about to deliver bad news. "But I've already coordinated everything with the club's event staff. They have very specific protocols about outside contributions. And honestly, it's easier if we just let the professionals handle it." What she didn't say, but what I understood clearly, was that my homemade contributions weren't sophisticated enough for the Sterling family standard of entertaining. The party itself was a spectacular affair, a dozen 8-year-olds running around manicured lawns while their parents sipped champagne and discussed private school applications and summer home rentals. I arrived wearing my best dress, carrying a carefully chosen gift for Tommy, and prepared to celebrate my grandson's special day. Instead, I found myself relegated to what I came to think of as the service provider table, seated with the photographer, the party planner, and the woman hired to manage the pony rides. When other parents asked how I knew the family, Victoria would introduce me with phrases like, "Margaret helps out with Tommy sometimes," or "she's very involved in healthcare," always managing to avoid mentioning that I was Tommy's grandmother or that my involvement in healthcare meant I was the chief of emergency medicine at the region's leading trauma center. But the real complication arose when I was approached by Vivian Ashworth, the wife of one of Marcus's potential business partners. Vivian was exactly the type of woman Victoria aspired to be: old money, impeccable breeding, and the kind of social connections that could open doors throughout the business community. "I don't believe we've met," Vivian said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. "I'm Vivian Ashworth. Victoria mentioned you work in the medical field?" Before I could respond, Victoria appeared at my elbow like a guardian angel with questionable motives. "Vivian, how wonderful that you could make it. Yes, Margaret is very dedicated to her work at the hospital. She's been such a help to us during Marcus's transition period." The phrase, "help to us," carried implications that made my stomach clench. Was Victoria suggesting that I was some kind of hired assistance rather than family? The conversation continued, with Vivian asking polite but probing questions about my work, while Victoria managed every response, steering the discussion away from my actual qualifications and toward vague mentions of my supportive nature and dedication to service. "How admirable," Vivian said when Victoria mentioned my long hours at the hospital. "It must be so fulfilling to work in such a hands-on environment. I imagine you see all sorts of interesting cases." "Actually," I began, hoping to share something meaningful about my work. "I specialize in emergency medicine, which means—" "Margaret has such wonderful stories," Victoria interrupted smoothly. "Though we try not to discuss medical details at social gatherings, some people can be a bit squeamish about hospital talk, you know?" The dismissal was subtle, but unmistakable. Victoria had just signaled to Vivian Ashworth that my professional expertise was inappropriate for polite company, that my life's work was somehow too graphic or unrefined for their sophisticated conversation. Later that evening, I overheard a conversation that clarified exactly how Victoria was positioning my presence in their lives. She was talking to her mother Constance and another woman I didn't recognize, their voices carrying across the club's terrace as I stepped outside for some fresh air. "It's been such a blessing having Margaret available during this difficult time," Victoria was saying. "She's been incredibly generous with her resources, and of course having someone with medical knowledge in the family is always useful." "How fortunate," the unfamiliar woman replied. "Is she a nurse? I know several lovely nurses who've been such treasures to their families." "She's very experienced," Victoria responded, again avoiding any mention of my actual credentials. "And so willing to help however she can. It's wonderful having someone so practical, in the family. Practical. As if my decades of medical training and my position as department chief were simply useful skills, like knowing how to change a tire or unclog a drain. But Constance's next comment revealed the true depth of the social calculations at play. "You're being very wise about this, darling. Margaret seems like a perfectly nice woman, but you have to be careful about how you integrate different backgrounds into your social circle. The Ashworths and their friends come from a very particular world, and they notice details about breeding and education." "I know, Mother," Victoria replied. "I'm managing the situation carefully. Margaret understands that some events are more appropriate for family participation than others." Standing there in the shadows of the country club terrace, listening. To them discuss me like I was a problematic relative who needed to be managed and contained. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not only was Victoria taking my financial support for granted, but she was actively working to limit my involvement in my own family's life based on her perception of my social inadequacy. The pattern became clearer over the following months. I was welcome at small family dinners where my contributions could be helpful, bringing groceries, cooking meals, or watching Tommy while they attended social functions. But I was systematically excluded from any gathering where the sterling family's social standing might be affected by my presence. When Marcus landed a promising interview with Blackstone Investment Group, a prestigious firm where Vivian Ashworth's husband served on the advisory board, Victoria was very specific about my role in the process. "We're having the Ashworths over for dinner next week," she explained during one of my grocery delivery visits. "Richard Ashworth has significant influence at Blackstone, and this dinner could really make the difference for Marcus's candidacy. I know you'll understand why this needs to be a more intimate gathering." "Of course," I replied, though understanding and accepting were two different things. "I'm sure you'll have a lovely evening." I was hoping you might be willing to take Tommy for the night, Victoria continued. Maybe have a sleepover at your place. We'll need to focus entirely on making the right impression, and you know how children can be. Unpredictable. So I was good enough to provide childcare and financial support, but not sophisticated enough to sit at a dinner table with the people whose approval could advance my son's career. The woman whose money was keeping their house from foreclosure was too embarrassing to be seen by the very social circle that their lifestyle depended on impressing. The dinner was apparently a success. Marcus got the job at Blackstone with a salary that would eventually allow them to resume financial independence. But rather than gratitude for the support that had carried them through their crisis, I found myself even more marginalized as they celebrated their return to financial stability. The thank you dinner they planned to celebrate Marcus's new position was held at the same country club where Tommy's birthday party had been. When I asked about the time and dress code, Victoria's response revealed just how my status in their lives had evolved. "Oh, Margaret, you're so sweet to be interested," she said with that familiar tone of condescending affection. "But this is really more of a business celebration. Marcus needs to network with his new colleagues, and you know how these corporate events can be, very focused on professional relationships and industry connections." What she meant, of course, was that the woman who had financially supported them through their darkest period was still too much of a social liability to be included in their moment of triumph. I had served my purpose as their private ATM, but now that they were back on their feet, it was time for me to retreat to the shadows where people of my background belonged. The final insult came when I learned, through Tommy, that several of my own former colleagues from the hospital had been invited to the celebration. Dr. Patricia Morrison, who ran the cardiology department, and Dr. James Chen, the hospital's chief administrator, were both in attendance as Marcus and Victoria celebrated their financial recovery with the very people whose professional opinions they supposedly found too graphic for polite company. The message was clear. Medical professionals were perfectly acceptable guests when they served Victoria's social ambitions. But the medical professional who happened to be Marcus's mother was still too embarrassing to acknowledge publicly, despite being the person who had made their recovery possible. Even after Marcus secured his position at Blackstone Investment Group, the financial requests didn't stop. If anything, they intensified, accompanied by increasingly elaborate justifications and a growing sense of entitlement that left me feeling more like a resource to be extracted from, rather than a family member to be cherished. The first post-employment request came just 3 weeks after Marcus started his new job. Victoria called me on a Thursday evening, her voice bright with excitement about what she described as a fantastic opportunity. "Margaret, you'll never guess what's happened," she began, the enthusiasm in her tone immediately putting me on guard. "The Kennedys, you remember Richard Kennedy from Marcus's golf club? They're selling their membership at the Ocean View Yacht Club. It's incredibly exclusive, with a waiting list that's normally years long, but they're willing to transfer their membership directly to us." I waited for her to continue, though I already sensed where this conversation was heading. "The thing is," Victoria went on, "the transfer fee is $85,000, and it needs to be paid within the next 2 weeks, or the opportunity goes to the next family on their private list. Marcus's first paycheck from Blackstone won't come until next month, and with all our expenses getting back on track—" "Victoria," I interrupted gently, "Marcus just started working again. Surely a yacht club membership isn't a necessity right now?" Her laugh was light, but carried an edge of impatience. "Oh, Margaret, you don't understand how these business relationships work. The Ocean View Yacht Club isn't just about boats and social events. It's where the real networking happens. Half of Marcus's new clients are members there. If we want him to succeed at Blackstone, if we want him to build the kind of relationships that lead to partnerships and major accounts, this membership is essential. Essential." Every request came with that word now, as if my financial support wasn't generosity, but a basic requirement for their continued existence. "And besides," she continued, "this is really an investment in Tommy's future too. The yacht club has an excellent junior sailing program, and so many of the members' children end up at the best prep schools and universities. It's about giving our son every possible advantage. When I hesitated, Victoria's tone shifted to the wounded disappointment she had perfected over the months of our financial arrangement. I thought you understood how important Marcus's career success is to all of us. After everything we've been through, I assumed you'd want to help us take advantage of opportunities that could secure our family's future. The guilt manipulation was masterful. Somehow, my reluctance to fund their yacht club membership had become evidence of my lack of investment in my own family's well-being. I wrote the check, telling myself it was a one-time investment in Marcus's professional future. But I was learning that with Victoria, there was no such thing as one-time anything. 2 months later, it was Tommy's education that required my immediate financial intervention. The exclusive Riverside Academy, where Tommy had been attending since kindergarten, was implementing a new excellence initiative that included smaller class sizes, expanded arts programming, and enhanced technology resources. The catch? ND, additional $24,000 annual fee on top of the already substantial tuition. We simply cannot let Tommy fall behind, Victoria explained during one of our increasingly frequent financial discussions. The other children in his class, the Ashworth boy, the Morrison twins, the Sterling children, they're all staying in the program. If Tommy switches to public school now, he'll lose all the social connections he's built, and frankly, the academic standards just aren't comparable. When I pointed out that the local public schools were actually quite well regarded, Victoria's response revealed the depth of her social anxieties. Margaret, with all due respect, you don't understand the world Tommy is growing up in. These aren't just educational decisions. They're about maintaining the social fabric that will support him throughout his life. The children he goes to school with now will be his college classmates, his business partners, his social circle as an adult. The irony of this conversation wasn't lost on me. Here was a woman explaining why my grandson needed to maintain his elite social connections while simultaneously ensuring that I, his grandmother, was excluded from family gatherings because my background might embarrass them in front of those same social circles. But the most galling aspect of these requests was how Victoria had begun framing my financial contributions. No longer were they favors or temporary assistance. They had become my family investment portfolio, as she liked to call it. You've been so wise with your financial planning over the years, she would say. And now you have the opportunity to see those investments pay dividends in Marcus's success and Tommy's future. Really, when you think about it, supporting us now is just another form of wealth management. Wealth management. As if my decades of careful saving and responsible spending had been conducted specifically to fund their lifestyle choices. The requests became more frequent and more elaborate. Victoria's car lease was expiring, and she needed help with the down payment on a new BMW because Marcus's clients notice what kind of car pulls up to their homes. The kitchen appliances in their Crescent Hills house were becoming dated, and a renovation was essential because we do so much entertaining for Marcus's business development. Tommy needed private tennis lessons because athletics are crucial for college applications. And of course, the lessons had to be with the exclusive instructor who charged $200 per session. Each request was accompanied by detailed explanations of how my financial support was really an investment in the family's collective future. Victoria had developed an entire philosophy around what she called strategic family funding, complete with charts and projections showing how my current contributions would lead to long-term benefits for everyone involved. Think of it this way, she explained during one particularly elaborate presentation involving actual printed spreadsheets. Every dollar you invest in maintaining our lifestyle now multiplies in value through Marcus's career advancement. When he makes partner at Blackstone, and he will with the right support system, your initial investment will have generated returns far beyond what you could achieve through traditional retirement accounts. The most insulting part was how Victoria had begun scheduling these financial discussions. Rather than calling when they were desperate, she now set up formal meetings, usually scheduled around my work shifts at the hospital. I would arrive home, exhausted after 12-hour days of literally saving lives, only to find Victoria waiting in my living room with her laptop and her latest funding proposal. "I hope you don't mind that I let myself in," she would say, having long ago acquired a key ostensibly for emergency childcare situations. "I brought dinner from that lovely Italian place downtown. I thought we could discuss some exciting opportunities while you eat." The dinners were always expensive, always charged to credit cards that I was helping them pay off, and always accompanied by presentations explaining why my continued financial support was not just appreciated, but absolutely crucial for the family's trajectory. During one of these sessions, Victoria introduced what she called the grandmother investment strategy, complete with glossy printouts and highlighted charts. According to her research, the most successful families were those where grandparents took active financial roles in their grandchildren's development, funding everything from education to extracurricular activities to social experiences. "Studies show," she explained, clicking through slides on her laptop, "that children who receive comprehensive grandparent investment support are 67% more likely to attend Ivy League universities and 45% more likely to achieve executive-level positions in their careers. Really, Margaret, supporting Tommy's development now is the greatest gift you could give him." The fact that I was providing this grandparent investment support while being deemed too embarrassing to attend family functions apparently didn't factor into her calculations. But perhaps the most telling moment came when Victoria began referring to our financial arrangement in front of other people. During a conversation with one of her friends at the country club, a conversation I overheard while picking up Tommy from a playdate, she described my support as Margaret's contribution to family operations. "She's been so generous with sharing her resources," Victoria told her friend, as if my decades of hard work and careful saving had resulted in a communal fund that naturally belonged to the entire family. "It's wonderful having someone in the family who's been so financially responsible and can help support our goals." Standing in the country club parking lot, listening to Victoria describe my sacrifice as if it were a family entitlement, I finally understood the complete transformation of our relationship. I had evolved from an embarrassing relative to be managed, to a financial resource to be optimized, to a family asset whose contributions were simply expected as part of the natural order of things. The woman who smelled too much like medicine to be included in family celebrations had somehow become the primary source of funding for those same celebrations. And the more I gave, the more they expected, until my generosity had created a monster of entitlement that viewed my support not as a gift to be grateful for, but as a service I owed them for the privilege of being related to their success. The breaking point came during what should have been one of the most joyful times of the year, the week leading up to Christmas. I had just completed a brutally demanding month at Riverside Medical Center, where a flu outbreak had pushed our emergency department beyond capacity. For weeks, I had been working 16-hour shifts, sleeping in the on-call room more often than in my own bed, and surviving on vending machine coffee and the occasional sandwich grabbed between critical cases. The physical exhaustion was overwhelming, but it was the emotional toll that truly wore me down. We had lost 3 patients that month, elderly individuals whose immune systems couldn't handle the complications of influenza. Each death felt personal, each grieving family members, tears a reminder of the weight of responsibility I carried every day. At 67, I was beginning to feel the accumulated stress of 3 decades in emergency medicine, but I pushed through because that's what my patients needed. It was during this period of intense professional pressure that Victoria chose to escalate her demands to a level that would finally shatter my willingness to enable their lifestyle. The call came on a Tuesday evening as I was finally driving home after a particularly harrowing shift. A construction worker had been brought in after falling 3 stories and it had taken 8 hours of surgery and intensive monitoring to stabilize him. I was emotionally drained, physically exhausted, and looking forward to nothing more than a hot shower and 12 hours of uninterrupted sleep. "Margaret, thank goodness I reached you." Victoria's voice came through my car's Bluetooth system, her tone carrying an urgency that immediately put me on alert. "We have a situation that needs immediate attention." I pulled into my driveway, too tired to properly process whatever crisis Victoria was about to present. "What's wrong? Is everyone okay?" "Everyone's fine, but we have a major opportunity that's time-sensitive," she replied, and I could hear the familiar excitement in her voice that had preceded every previous financial request. "The Worthington estate is available for our Christmas party." I sat in my car, engine still running, trying to understand why a venue rental constituted an emergency worthy of calling me during my drive home from the hospital. "Christmas party?" "The annual Sterling family Christmas celebration," Victoria explained with the patience of someone addressing a particularly slow child. "Mother Constance has been hosting it for 23 years, but this year her house is being renovated. We volunteered to take over hosting duties, which is a tremendous honor and responsibility." The implications of this honor were becoming clear, and they filled me with a familiar sense of dread. "The Worthington estate is the most prestigious venue in the county," Victoria continued, her voice building with enthusiasm. "It's where the governor's family hosts their events, where the Ashworths held their daughter's wedding. Having our family Christmas party there would cement Marcus's position in the social hierarchy that's so important for his continued success at Blackstone." "And the cost?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer would be substantial. "Well, that's where things get a bit complicated," Victoria said, her tone shifting to the carefully modulated cadence she used when delivering bad news. "The venue rental, catering, decorations, entertainment, and incidental expenses come to approximately $47,000. But Margaret, this isn't just a party. It's an investment in our family's social capital that will pay dividends for years to come." $47,000 for a single evening's entertainment, more than many people earned in an entire year. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of exhaustion pressing down on me like a physical force. "Victoria, that's an enormous amount of money for one party." "It's not just one party," she corrected, sharply. "This is the Sterling family Christmas celebration. There will be over 100 guests, including Marcus's most important clients, potential business partners, and the kind of social connections that determine career trajectories. Mother Constance has already announced that we're hosting, invitations have been sent, and expectations have been set." The manipulation was elegant in its simplicity. By positioning the event as a fait accompli, Victoria had created a situation where refusing to fund the party would mean humiliating the entire family in front of their social circle. "And the timing is crucial," she continued. "The deposit is due tomorrow, or we lose the venue entirely. Mother Constance says there are 3 other families interested in the Christmas slot, and the Worthingtons won't hold our reservation without confirmed payment. Tomorrow." After a month of working myself to exhaustion, Victoria was demanding nearly $50,000 with less than 24 hours' notice. "Victoria," I said slowly, "I've been working extra shifts for weeks just to keep up with your previous requests. I'm exhausted, I'm behind on my own bills, and I simply don't have that kind of money readily available." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several long seconds before Victoria responded, and when she did, her tone had shifted to something I had never heard from her before: cold, calculating, and vaguely threatening. "Margaret, I think you're forgetting something important here. This isn't just about a party. This is about your grandson's future, your son's career, and your family's reputation. When you agreed to support us financially, you became invested in our success. You can't just withdraw that support when it becomes inconvenient." The phrase, when you agreed to support us financially, hit me like a physical blow. As if my help, during their crisis, had constituted a binding contract rather than an act of generosity. Furthermore, Victoria continued, her voice taking on a lecturing quality, I think it's important to consider what declining to help would communicate to the rest of the family. Mother Constance, the Ashworths, Marcus's colleagues, they all know about your contributions to our lifestyle. If you suddenly become uncooperative, it raises questions about family unity and commitment that could damage all of our reputations. The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. Victoria was suggesting that my refusal to fund their party would be positioned as a betrayal that would harm not just them, but my own standing within the family structure. But then came the moment that changed everything. The comment that finally revealed the complete contempt with which Victoria viewed both me and my contributions. Honestly, Margaret, I'm beginning to wonder if this reluctance has to do with your background. People from working-class families sometimes have difficulty understanding the kind of investments required to maintain social position. Maybe you don't appreciate how expensive it is to move in our circles because you've never really been part of them. The words hung in the air like poison gas, filling my car with their toxic implications. After months of providing financial support that had enabled their entire lifestyle, after years of accepting social exclusion because I apparently wasn't sophisticated enough for their circles, Victoria was now suggesting that my hesitation to fund their party was evidence of my working-class inability to understand their superior way of life. And another thing, she added, apparently emboldened by my stunned silence. I think we need to have a serious conversation about your attitude lately. Marcus has mentioned that you seem resentful about helping the family, that you make comments about our expenses that frankly come across as judgmental. We understand that your lifestyle is simpler than ours, but that doesn't give you the right to question how we choose to live. Simpler. As if my decision to live within my means rather than constantly seeking financial support from family members was a character flaw rather than responsible behavior. The bottom line is this, Victoria concluded, her voice now carrying the authority of someone accustomed to getting her way. We need the deposit tomorrow, and we're counting on you to provide it. This family has worked too hard to build our reputation to let it be damaged by penny pinching at the worst possible moment. Penny pinching. Refusing to immediately provide $47,000 for a party was characterized as penny pinching. Sat in my driveway for a long time after ending that call, watching the lights in my neighbor's windows and thinking about the profound disconnect between the woman who had just spent 16 hours trying to save lives and the family who viewed her as an ATM, whose reluctance to dispense money was evidence of her inferior breeding and character. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I realized that no amount of financial support would ever earn me respect from people who viewed my working-class origins and medical career as inherent character flaws. I had been funding their lifestyle while being excluded from their lives, enabling their success while being treated as a source of embarrassment. The woman who smelled like medicine was finally ready to give Victoria and Marcus a dose of reality. That would taste far more bitter than any antiseptic they found so offensive. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea that had long since grown cold, surrounded by financial documents that told the story of 18 months of systematic exploitation. Bank statements showing monthly transfers totaling more than $180,000. Credit card bills for their yacht club membership, car payments, and countless essential expenses. Receipts for Tommy's private school fees, tennis lessons, and tutoring sessions that I had funded while being deemed too embarrassing to attend his school functions. By dawn, I had made my decision. But this wasn't going to be a simple refusal to fund their Christmas party. Victoria wanted to play games about family loyalty and social obligations. She was about to learn that I had been playing a much longer, more strategic game than she had ever imagined. The first call I made was to Dr. Patricia Morrison, the chief administrator at Riverside Medical Center. Patricia and I had worked together for over a decade, and she had become both a colleague and a trusted friend. More importantly, she served on the board of directors for several of the most prestigious charitable organizations in the county, including the Clearwater Children's Foundation, where Constance Sterling was a prominent donor and board member. "Patricia," I said when she answered her office phone, "I need to ask you about the Children's Foundation Gala Planning Committee. Aren't they looking for someone with healthcare expertise to join the organizing board?" "Margaret, what perfect timing," Patricia replied enthusiastically. "We were just discussing that yesterday. The foundation wants to expand its focus on pediatric emergency care, and we desperately need someone with your background and credentials. Are you interested?" Within an hour, I had accepted a position on the Gala Planning Committee for the most exclusive charitable event in Clearwater County's social calendar. The same event where Constance Sterling had served as co-chair for the past 5 years, where Victoria had been desperately angling for an invitation, and where the guest list read like a who's who of everyone Marcus and Victoria were trying to impress. My second call was to James Mitchell, the private banker who had managed my accounts for the past 15 years. James had been after me for years to diversify my investment portfolio and had repeatedly suggested that I was being too conservative with my financial planning. "James, I'd like to schedule a meeting to discuss some significant changes to my financial strategy," I told him. "I'm ready to be more aggressive with my investments." "Dr. Bellweather, that's wonderful news," James replied. "I've been telling you for years that you have the foundation for some truly impressive portfolio growth. When would you like to meet?" "This afternoon, if possible." "And James? I'd like to explore some investment opportunities that might require moving substantial funds out of my accessible accounts. I think it's time I started thinking more seriously about long-term wealth building rather than keeping so much money liquid." By noon, I had restructured my entire financial portfolio. The money that Victoria assumed would always be available for her emergencies was now locked into long-term investments, retirement accounts, and charitable foundations that would provide tax benefits while making my assets essentially inaccessible for frivolous spending. But the most important call I made was to Tommy's school. I had been funding his tuition for over a year, which meant I had significant standing as what the school administration considered a contributing family member. "Mrs. Henderson," I said to the school's development director, "I wanted to discuss establishing a scholarship fund in my late husband's name. I'd like to create an endowment that would provide educational opportunities for children from working-class families who demonstrate academic excellence but might not otherwise have access to quality education. The James Bellweather Memorial Scholarship would be funded with a significant portion of my savings, ensuring that children from backgrounds similar to my own would have opportunities that didn't depend on family wealth or social connections. It was a legacy that aligned with my values rather than simply enabling others' extravagance. With my financial fortress secured, I was ready for Victoria's call. It came at exactly 2:47 p.m. as I was reviewing the scholarship paperwork in my office at the hospital. "Margaret, please tell me you've arranged for the deposit." Victoria's voice carried the strained cheerfulness of someone trying to mask growing panic. "The Worthingtons need confirmation by 5 o'clock, or we lose the venue entirely." "Victoria," I said calmly, "I won't be providing funding for the Christmas party." The silence on the other end stretched so long that I wondered if the call had dropped. When Victoria finally spoke, her voice was tight with barely controlled anger. "What do you mean you won't be providing funding? Margaret, we discussed this yesterday. The family is counting on you. The invitations have been sent, and Mother Constance has already made arrangements based on our confirmation." "I understand that you've made commitments based on assumptions about my continued financial support," I replied, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. "But I've decided to redirect my resources toward investments that better align with my values and long-term goals." Your values? Victoria's voice rose to a pitch that suggested she was having difficulty processing what she was hearing. What about your values toward family? What about your commitment to Tommy's future and Marcus's career? Funny you should mention my values toward family, I said, settling back in my chair. Because I've been doing a lot of thinking about what family means, and I've realized that real family relationships are built on mutual respect, not financial obligation. Of course there's mutual respect, Victoria protested, though her tone suggested she wasn't entirely convinced by her own words. We've always appreciated your help, Margaret. You know how grateful we are. Grateful enough to include me in family gatherings? Grateful enough to introduce me by my professional title instead of hiding my accomplishments? Grateful enough to treat me like a valued family member rather than an embarrassing necessity? Another long silence, followed by Victoria's voice taking on the wheedling tone she used when she needed to extract herself from difficult situations. Margaret, I think you're misunderstanding some social dynamics. It's not that we're embarrassed by you. It's just that different occasions call for different kinds of interactions. Surely you can see the difference between intimate family, time and business networking events? You're absolutely right, I said, smiling despite myself. Different occasions do call for different kinds of interactions, which is why I've accepted a position on the board of the Clearwater Children's Foundation Gala Committee. The sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line told me that Victoria understood the implications immediately. The Children's Foundation. Gala was the most exclusive social event of the year, the very gathering where she had been hoping to make connections that would elevate their social standing. What? Victoria managed to stammer. I'll be working closely with Patricia Morrison to develop the Foundation's new Pediatric Emergency Care Initiative. It's going to be quite a prominent role, actually. Patricia thinks my expertise and background make me an ideal spokesperson for the Foundation's mission. But that's the same gala where Mother Constance serves as co-chair, Victoria said, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes, isn't that interesting? I'm sure we'll have many opportunities to work together. Patricia mentioned that the committee is particularly interested in authenticity. Board members who represent real expertise rather than just social connections. I could almost hear Victoria's mind racing as she tried to process the implications of my new position. The woman she had been excluding from family gatherings because of her working-class background was now positioned to interact with their entire social circle in a context where her medical expertise would be valued and celebrated. Furthermore, I continued, I've established a scholarship fund in James's memory that will provide educational opportunities for children from working-class families. The fund will be administered through Tommy's school, so I'll be much more involved in the educational community there. Margaret, Victoria's voice had taken on a desperate edge. What about the Christmas party? What about our commitment to the family? I suggest you contact Mother Constance and explain that your financial planning was insufficient to cover the event you committed to hosting. I'm sure she'll understand that sometimes people overextend themselves and need to make more realistic choices. You can't do this, Victoria said, her voice rising with panic. You can't just abandon the family when we need you most. I'm not abandoning anyone, I replied calmly. I'm simply redirecting my resources toward causes and relationships that appreciate both my contributions and my presence. The woman who smells like medicine has decided to invest in organizations that value healing over appearances. When I hung up the phone, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't experienced in years. For the first time since this financial entanglement began, I was in control of my own resources and my own dignity. Victoria wanted to know what medicine tasted like. She was about to discover that the most effective treatments often come with significant side effects, and the cure for entitlement can be particularly bitter to swallow. The fallout from my decision was swift and revealing. Within hours of our phone call, Victoria had apparently contacted Marcus, because my son appeared at my doorstep that evening looking haggard and desperate in a way I hadn't seen since his unemployment crisis. Mom, what the hell is going on? he demanded as I opened the front door, his usual composed demeanor completely shattered. Victoria says you're refusing to help with the Christmas party and that you've somehow gotten involved. With the Children's Foundation Board? I stepped aside to let him in, noting how he paced my living room like a caged animal, running his hands through his hair in the same gesture he'd used as a child when he was overwhelmed. "Sit down, Marcus," I said gently, settling into my favorite armchair. "We need to have a conversation that's long overdue." "A conversation?" His voice rose with frustration. "Mom, do you understand what you've done? The party invitations went out 3 weeks ago. The Ashworths, the Kennedys, the Worthingtons, everyone who matters for my career is expecting to attend. If we have to cancel now, it's going to look like we're financially unstable, like we can't manage our commitments." "And whose fault would that be?" I asked quietly. The question seemed to catch him off guard. He stopped pacing and stared at me as if I'd spoken in a foreign language. "What do you mean, whose fault? You agreed to help us, and now you're backing out at the last minute. I don't understand what's changed." I leaned forward in my chair, studying the face of the son I had raised, looking for traces of the boy who had once hugged me after every shift at the hospital, who had been proud to tell his friends that his mom was a doctor who saved people's lives. "Marcus, when was the last time you introduced me to someone as Dr. Margaret Bellweather, Chief of Emergency Medicine at Riverside Medical Center?" He blinked, clearly confused by the question. "What does that have to do with anything? When was the last time you invited me to a dinner party at your house? When was the last time you asked about my work, my patients, my life outside of being your financial backup plan?" "Mom, you're being dramatic. Of course we value you. Your family." "Am I?" I asked, reaching for the folder of documents I had prepared. "Because for the past 18 months, I've felt more like a private bank than a family member." I opened the folder and spread the financial statements across my coffee table. Marcus's eyes widened as he saw the scope of what I had documented. Every transfer, every payment, every request that had drained my savings to fund their lifestyle. $187,000, I said calmly. "That's how much I've contributed to your household since you lost your job at Pinnacle. Mortgage payments, car leases, school tuition, country club memberships, yacht club fees, tennis lessons, kitchen renovations, and countless other expenses that Victoria deemed essential for maintaining your social position." Marcus stared at the papers, his face growing pale as the numbers sank in. I didn't realize it had added up to so much." "Because you never asked," I replied. "You never wanted to know what this was costing me, what sacrifices I was making, what impact it was having on my own financial security. You just expected the money to be available whenever Victoria decided you needed it." "But Mom, we always said we'd pay you back once I got established at Blackstone." "Did you?" "Because I don't recall any formal agreement about repayment. I remember a lot of requests for help, a lot of explanations about why each expense was crucial for your future. But I don't remember any serious discussions about when or how you planned to become financially independent again." Marcus slumped into the chair across from me, his confident facade crumbling. "We were grateful, Mom. We are grateful. Maybe we didn't say it enough, but we never took your help for granted." "Marcus," I said gently, 3 weeks ago, your wife told me I couldn't hug my own grandson because I smelled like medicine. She said I was too embarrassing to be seen by your business associates. Yesterday, she told me that my reluctance to provide $47,000 for a party was evidence of my inferior working-class background." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus stared at me with an expression of shock that suggested he was hearing these details for the first time. "She didn't tell you about any of that, did she?" I continued. "She didn't mention that she's been systematically excluding me from family events because my profession makes me unsuitable for your social circle." "Mom, that's not... Victoria wouldn't..." He stopped, his face reflecting the growing realization that he couldn't actually defend his wife's behavior because he hadn't been paying attention to how she treated me. "When was the last time you visited me here in my home?" I asked. "When was the last time you called just to check on me? Not because you needed something? When was the last time you expressed any interest in my life beyond my ability to solve? Your financial problems?" Marcus's shoulders sagged as the weight of my questions settled over him. "I've been so focused on getting back on my feet, on building my career at Blackstone. I guess I lost sight of other things." "You lost sight of me," I said simply. "You lost sight of the fact that I'm a person with my own dreams, my own needs, my own right to be treated with respect and dignity." I reached across the table and touched his hand. "Marcus, I love you more than life itself. You're my son, and nothing will ever change that. But I can't continue to enable a lifestyle that treats me as an embarrassment while depending on me as a financial resource." "What do you want us to do?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I want you to learn to live within your means," I replied. "I want you to build a marriage based on partnership and responsibility, not on spending money you don't have to impress people who don't actually care about you. I want you to raise Tommy with values that include gratitude, respect, and appreciation. For people who work hard, regardless of what their work smells like." Before Marcus could respond, there was a sharp knock at my front door. Through the window, I could see Victoria's BMW in my driveway, and I suspected our conversation was about to become more complicated. Victoria entered my living room like a woman on a mission, her usual polished appearance slightly disheveled, and her eyes bright with anger and desperation. "Margaret, thank goodness you're both here," she said, not bothering with pleasantries. "I've been thinking about our conversation, and I believe there's been a misunderstanding. Perhaps we can work out a payment plan for the party expenses, something that would be more manageable for your budget constraints." "Victoria," I said calmly, "there's no misunderstanding. I'm not funding your party, today or ever. I'm also not funding any future requests for financial support. It's time for you and Marcus to take full responsibility for your own expenses." "But that's impossible," Victoria protested, her composure beginning to crack. "We have commitments, obligations, a reputation to maintain. People are expecting you to live within your means," I interrupted. "And if you can't afford the lifestyle you've been presenting, then perhaps it's time to be honest about your actual circumstances instead of using my money to create an illusion of prosperity." Victoria's eyes darted between Marcus and me, clearly searching for some angle that might salvage the situation. "What about Tommy? What about his education, his future? Surely you wouldn't want your grandson to suffer because of some temporary disagreement between adults." "Tommy's education will continue," I said firmly. "The scholarship fund I've established will ensure that he has access to excellent schooling regardless of your financial situation. The difference is that his opportunities will be based on merit and need, not on his parents' ability to manipulate his grandmother into funding their extravagance." "Scholarship fund?" Victoria's voice rose with panic. "What scholarship fund?" "The James Bellweather Memorial Scholarship," Marcus said quietly, apparently having read through my documentation while Victoria was speaking. "Mom, this is a substantial endowment." "It represents my values," I replied. "Supporting children who work hard and dream big, regardless of their family's financial status or social connections. Children like I once was, like your father was, like many of the patients I treat every day who deserve opportunities based on their potential, not their parents' bank accounts." Victoria stared at the scholarship papers as if they contained some incomprehensible foreign language. "But that money, that was supposed to be for our family, for Tommy's advantages, for maintaining our position." "That money was mine," I said firmly. "And I've chosen to invest it in values that honor the memory of the man who taught me that honest work is never something to be ashamed of, regardless of how it makes you smell at the end of the day." The room fell silent, except for the ticking of my grandmother's mantel clock. Victoria and Marcus sat frozen, apparently trying to process the complete transformation of their financial landscape. The woman they had taken for granted, excluded from their social circle, and treated as an embarrassing necessity had just restructured their entire world with a few strategic decisions and phone calls. "The medicine I'm prescribing," I said softly, "might taste bitter at first, but I believe it will ultimately cure you of some very unhealthy habits and help you build a life based on authentic success rather than borrowed prosperity." 6 months later, I stood at the podium of the Riverside Grand Ballroom, looking out at an audience of 500 distinguished guests attending the inaugural James Bellweather Memorial Scholarship Gala. The same room where Victoria had once dismissed me as too embarrassing for their social gatherings was now filled with people who had come specifically to honor my late husband's legacy and support my vision for helping working-class children achieve their educational dreams. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice carrying clearly through the elegant space. "When my husband James used to come home from long shifts at the hospital, his hands would smell like antiseptic and dedication. He taught me that the scent of honest work is the most beautiful perfume in the world because it represents the commitment to making life better for others." In the front row, Patricia Morrison beamed with pride, flanked by the mayor, 2 state senators, and the president of the university where James and I had met all those years ago. The governor himself had sent a personal letter of support that Patricia had read earlier in the evening, praising the scholarship fund's innovative approach to supporting first-generation college students from medical and working families. The transformation of my life over these past months had been more profound than I could have imagined. My position on the Children's Foundation Board had evolved into a leadership role that commanded respect throughout the medical and philanthropic communities. The scholarship fund had attracted matching donations from major corporations and established families who saw the value in supporting merit-based education rather than legacy admissions. But perhaps the most satisfying change was in how people now introduced me at social gatherings. No longer was I Margaret, who works at the hospital. I was Dr. Margaret Bellweather, founder of the Bellweather Scholarship Foundation and chief of emergency medicine at Riverside Medical Center. My professional accomplishments had become sources of pride rather than embarrassment, my working-class background a testament to the American dream rather than a social liability. Marcus had arrived early that evening, looking more relaxed and confident than I had seen him in years. The past 6 months had been challenging for him and Victoria, but they had ultimately proven transformative in ways I hadn't expected. Without access to my financial support, they had been forced to make difficult but necessary changes. The Crescent Hills mansion had been sold, and they had moved to a modest but comfortable home in Riverside Heights, a middle-class neighborhood where neighbors knew each other's names and children played in the streets without requiring club memberships to make friends. Marcus had discovered that his colleagues at Blackstone were more impressed by his work ethic and professional competence than by his zip code or his wife's social connections. His client base had actually expanded when he stopped focusing on impressing wealthy acquaintances and started concentrating on providing excellent financial advice to working families and small business owners. "Mom," he had told me during one of our weekly dinners, a tradition we had established after I made it clear that our relationship needed to be rebuilt on mutual respect rather than financial dependency. I didn't realize how much stress I was under trying to maintain that lifestyle. I actually enjoy my work more now that I'm not constantly worried about keeping up appearances. Victoria's transformation had been the most dramatic and, frankly, the most surprising. The woman who had once dismissed my medical career as embarrassing had enrolled in nursing school, inspired, she claimed, by watching me speak at a healthcare conference where I had been honored for my contributions to emergency medicine. "I never understood what your work really meant," she had admitted during a conversation that took place 3 months after that disastrous Christmas party that never happened. "I saw the antiseptic smell and the long hours, but I never saw the lives you saved, the families you helped, the difference you made every single day." She was sitting across from me at a small cafe near the university where she was taking prerequisite courses for her nursing program. Gone were the designer, clothes and expensive jewelry, replaced by simple jeans and a university sweatshirt. But there was something in her eyes that I had never seen before. Genuine purpose and self-respect that didn't depend on external validation. I think I spent so many years trying to prove I deserved my family's lifestyle that I forgot to build anything meaningful of my own, she continued. Watching you walk away from all of that, watching you choose your values over our expectations, it made me realize I wanted to be someone who contributed something real to the world. The nursing program was challenging for someone who had spent her adult life focused on social climbing rather than academic achievement, but Victoria had thrown herself into her studies with the same determination she had once applied to securing country club memberships. She was particularly drawn to pediatric nursing, hoping eventually to work with children from disadvantaged backgrounds. "I want Tommy to be proud of me for what I do, not for what I buy," she had said. "I want him to understand that the most important things in life can't be purchased with someone else's money." Tommy himself had adapted to their new circumstances, with the resilience that children often display when their parents finally start living authentically. He attended the local public school, where he excelled academically and made friends based on shared interests rather than family wealth. The tennis lessons and sailing club had been replaced by soccer practice and chess club, activities he seemed to enjoy far more than the structured entertainment of his previous lifestyle. Most importantly, Tommy had begun spending real time with me. Not just visits where I was hidden away until the important guests left, but genuine grandmother-grandson activities where we could talk about his dreams, his challenges, and his growing understanding of what it meant to work hard for something you believed in. "Grandma Maggie," he had said during one of our weekend science projects, where we were building a model of the human heart for his biology class, "I think I want to be a doctor like you when I grow up. I want to help people feel better." Standing at that podium 6 months later, looking out at the faces of people who had come to support educational opportunities for children like Tommy. Children whose potential would be measured by their dedication rather than their parents' bank accounts. I felt a profound sense of completion. Constance Sterling sat at table 12, having contributed a substantial donation to the scholarship fund in what I suspected was her way of acknowledging the grace with which I had handled her family's crisis. The Ashworths had endowed an entire scholarship in their name, and even the Worthingtons, owners of the estate where Victoria had wanted to hold that disastrous Christmas party, had become major supporters of the foundation. "The medicine I prescribed 6 months ago," I said, concluding my speech to warm applause, "was designed to cure a very specific ailment, the disease of taking for granted the people who love us most. I'm happy to report that the treatment has been remarkably successful, with minimal side effects and maximum long-term benefits for everyone involved." As I stepped down from the podium, Marcus approached with Tommy at his side. My son's eyes were bright with tears he wasn't trying to hide. "I'm so proud of you, Mom," he said, embracing me without any concern for who might be watching or what I might smell like after a long day of preparation. "I'm proud of what you've built, proud of the lives you're going to change, and proud to be your son." Victoria joined us, wearing her nursing school pin on the simple black dress she had chosen for the evening. "Margaret," she said, "I know I can never fully apologize for how I treated you, but I hope you know that you've changed my life in ways I'm still discovering. The woman who smells like medicine taught me that the most beautiful scent in the world is the aroma of purpose and service." That night, as I sat in my comfortable chair reading thank you notes from scholarship recipients and donation acknowledgments from supporters, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The woman who had once been told she wasn't sophisticated, enough for family gatherings, was now being celebrated by the most influential people in the state. But more importantly, I had reclaimed my family on terms that honored both my contributions and my dignity. The medicine I had given Victoria, a strong dose of consequences served with unwavering boundaries, had indeed tasted bitter at first. But like all effective treatments, it had ultimately healed not just the patient, but everyone affected by the original disease. Sometimes the most powerful medicine isn't found in a pharmacy or a hospital. Sometimes it's found in the courage to demand the respect you deserve, the wisdom to invest in your values rather than other people's expectations, and the strength to walk away from anything that diminishes your worth, even when that something carries your family name. The woman who smells like medicine had finally found her place in a world that appreciated both the antiseptic scent of dedication and the sweet perfume of a life lived with purpose, dignity, and uncompromising self-respect. 2 years later, I stood in the trauma bay at Riverside Medical Center, my hands working with the practiced precision of 4 decades in emergency medicine, when a young resident approached with a patient chart and an expression of nervous excitement. "Dr. Bellweather," she said, her voice carrying the same reverence I remembered hearing in my own voice when I spoke to senior physicians during my residency. "We have a car accident victim coming in, a construction worker who fell from scaffolding. The paramedics say his injuries are severe, but he's conscious and asking specifically for the lady doctor who smells like hope." I paused in my preparation, touched by the description. Over the past 2 years, as news of the Scholarship Foundation had spread throughout the community, I had discovered that my reputation in the medical field had evolved beyond my clinical expertise. Patients had begun to see me not just as someone who treated their injuries, but as someone who understood their struggles and believed in their potential. "What's the patient's name?" I asked, pulling on fresh gloves. "Miguel Santos," the resident replied. 23 years old, single father of a 6-year-old daughter. According to his co-workers, he's been working double shifts to save money for his daughter's education. He apparently heard about the Bellweather Scholarship Program and was hoping his daughter might qualify when she's older. As the trauma team wheeled Miguel into our bay, I saw in his eyes the same determination I had witnessed in countless working parents over the years. That fierce love that drives people to sacrifice everything for their children's futures. His injuries were serious but not life-threatening. A broken leg, several fractured ribs, and a concussion that would require careful monitoring. "Mr. Santos," I said gently as we began our assessment, "you're going to be just fine. We're going to take excellent care of you." "Doctor," he managed through the pain medication, "my daughter Sophia, she wants to be a doctor like you someday. She says she wants to help people and smell like medicine too." The reference to my former source of shame, now transformed into a symbol of hope for a 6-year-old girl, brought tears to my eyes. "Tell me about Sophia," I said as we continued his treatment. Over the next hour, as we stabilized Miguel's injuries and prepared him for surgery, he told me about his daughter's dreams, her exceptional grades despite attending an underfunded school, and his fears that his income as a construction worker wouldn't be enough to give her the opportunities she deserved. "The other workers, they told me about your scholarship," he said as we prepared to move him to the operating room. "They said you help kids like Sophia, kids whose parents work with their hands but dream with their hearts." After Miguel's surgery was successfully completed, I found myself thinking about Sophia Santos and the thousands of other children whose potential was limited only by their families' financial circumstances. The Bellweather Scholarship Foundation had grown beyond my wildest expectations, but stories like Miguel's reminded me that there was still so much work to be done. That evening, I attended the Foundation's monthly board meeting, where we reviewed applications and planned our expansion into additional counties. Patricia Morrison had become co-director, and our board now included several former scholarship recipients who had graduated from college and were giving back to help the next generation. "We have some exciting news," Patricia announced as we reviewed the quarterly report. "The State Education Department has approached us about creating a statewide version of the Bellweather program. They want to use our model as a template for supporting first-generation college students throughout the entire state." The room erupted in applause, but I found myself thinking about Victoria, who was now in her second year of nursing school and had become one of our most dedicated volunteers. She had insisted on managing our outreach to families in healthcare-related fields, using her own transformation as inspiration for parents who were struggling to balance demanding jobs with their children's educational needs. "There's something else," Patricia continued with a smile. "We've received a very special application that I think Margaret should review personally." She handed me a scholarship application that had been completed in careful, childish handwriting. The name at the top read, Sophia Santos, age 6, future doctor. Attached to the application was a drawing of a woman in a white coat with a stethoscope around her neck, standing next to a little girl holding a toy medical kit. At the bottom, in crayon letters that brought tears to my eyes, Sophia had written, "I want to smell like medicine and hope too." Her father submitted this from his hospital bed, Patricia explained. He wanted to make sure we knew about Sophia, even though she's too young for our current programs. He included a note saying that meeting you yesterday gave him hope that his daughter's dreams were possible. Looking at that drawing, I realized that the medicine I had prescribed to Victoria 2 years ago had created ripple effects far beyond our family. By refusing to enable their lifestyle and instead investing in values-based giving, I had helped create something that was now touching lives throughout our community and potentially across the entire state. My phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus. "Mom, Tommy got accepted to the pre-med program at State University. He says he wants to follow in his grandmother's footsteps and become an emergency room doctor. Victoria and I couldn't be prouder of both of you." Another message followed immediately from Victoria herself. "Margaret, I know I don't say this enough, but thank you for teaching me that the most beautiful smell in the world is the scent of purpose. I graduate nursing school next month, and I've been offered a position in the pediatric ward at Riverside. I can't wait to work alongside you again, this time as a colleague who truly understands what your work means." As I drove home that night, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The woman who had once been told she smelled too much like medicine to be welcomed at family gatherings was now being celebrated for turning that very scent into a symbol of hope and opportunity. The Scholarship Foundation had awarded over $2.3 million in educational support to 847 students from working families. 63 of our first recipients had already graduated from college, with many choosing careers in healthcare, education, and public service. Tommy was thriving in his pre-medical studies, driven by a genuine desire to help others rather than by social pressure or family expectations. Most importantly, I had learned that the most powerful medicine isn't always found in prescription, bottles, or surgical procedures. Sometimes it's found in the courage to establish boundaries, the wisdom to invest in your values, and the strength to demand the respect you deserve. The next morning, I returned to Riverside Medical Center for another day of saving lives and mentoring young doctors. But before my shift began, I stopped by Miguel Santos's room to check on his recovery. "Dr. Bellweather," he said, his face lighting up when he saw me. "I have something for you." He handed me a small envelope that contained another drawing from Sophia, this one showing 2 figures in white coats standing together under a rainbow. The caption read, "Grandma Dr. Margaret and future Dr. Sophia, partners in smelling like hope." As I pinned Sophia's drawing to the bulletin board in my office, next to photos from scholarship ceremonies and thank you letters from grateful families, I smiled at the beautiful irony of my journey. The scent that had once been used to shame me had become the fragrance of possibility for countless children who dreamed of careers in healing. The woman who smells like medicine had discovered that sometimes the most powerful treatment you can prescribe is your own example, showing others that dignity, purpose, and authentic success create a perfume more intoxicating than any designer fragrance money can buy. And in a world where appearances often matter more than substance, where social status frequently trumps personal character, that might just be the most revolutionary medicine of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.